Fall had painted Chandler in warm amber hues, and my morning routine remained unchanged, like the steady rhythm of my cards. Every day at 6, I laced up my running shoes and headed to Pioneer Park, where the dewdrops sparkled like tiny crystal balls on the grass. I am Evelyn Carter, a tarot reader who finds clarity in both my cards and my morning runs. The crisp Arizona air filled my lungs as I maintained my pace along the jogging trail, my brunette ponytail swaying with each step. The regulars, mostly retirees and young professionals, had become familiar faces over the past year, nodding in recognition as we passed each other. But that Tuesday morning brought something different. A flash of golden hair caught my attention, belonging to a woman I had never seen before. She ran with purpose, her form perfect and her blue eyes focused ahead. We passed each other near the old oak tree, and for a fleeting moment our eyes met. Something about her gaze lingered in my mind long after she disappeared around the bend. The next morning she was there again. Same time, same route, same determined expression. This time I noticed more details. Her high cheekbones, her expensive running gear, the way she carried herself with both grace and authority. We exchanged brief nods, a runner's courtesy, but something felt different about this interaction. By the third day, I had unconsciously begun to anticipate our passing moment. I found myself wondering about her story, what brought her to this park, to this specific time. The universe works in mysterious ways, and as a tarot reader, I had learned to pay attention to recurring patterns. That morning, however, the Arizona sky had other plans. The forecast had mentioned a slight chance of rain, but nobody expected the sudden downpour that caught us all off guard. The other runners quickly dispersed, leaving the park nearly empty. I was about to head home when I spotted her, the mysterious blonde, making her way toward the same gazebo I was approaching. We both rushed under the wooden shelter, slightly out of breath and dripping wet. Up close, she was even more striking, her wet hair darkened to honey gold, her blue eyes bright with amusement at our shared predicament. "Well, this is different from our usual passing by," she said with a slight smile, her voice carrying a hint of playfulness. "I'm Taylor." "Evelyn," I replied, wringing water from my ponytail. "I guess Mother Nature decided we needed a proper introduction." She laughed, and the sound seemed to brighten the gray morning. "I've seen you here the past few days," she admitted. "You have very consistent timing." "So do you," I pointed out, noting how her running jacket clung to her athletic frame. "New to the area?" "Relatively. Moved here for work at the university." She leaned against one of the gazebo's posts, seemingly in no hurry despite the rain. "I'm researching the historical significance of divination practices." My heart skipped a beat. Of all the coincidences, this felt almost too perfect. I debated whether to mention my profession, but something in her open expression made me take the chance. "That's fascinating. I actually read tarot cards professionally." Her eyes widened with genuine interest. "You're kidding, She paused, searching for the right word. "That's incredibly serendipitous." We stood there, sheltered from the rain, as the conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic. The downpour continued, but neither of us seemed to mind. There was something comforting about this chance encounter, something that felt right in a way I couldn't explain. When the rain finally eased to a drizzle, we exchanged numbers under the pretense of professional collaboration. But as I watched her jog away, I knew this was more than just a professional interest. The cards had always taught me to trust in timing, and something told me this was just the beginning of a much larger story. 3 days after our rain-soaked meeting, the bell above my shop door chimed. I was organizing my card displays when I looked up to see Taylor standing in the entrance of Mystic Insights, my cozy reading space in downtown Chandler. The morning light streaming through the window caught her blonde hair, creating a halo effect that made her look almost ethereal. "This is quite different from our usual running attire," she said, taking in the crystal-laden shelves and the vintage tarot artwork adorning the walls. She wore a tailored blazer over a silk blouse, looking every bit the accomplished academic she was. "Welcome to my sanctuary," I replied, gesturing to the comfortable reading area. "Though I have to admit, I didn't expect you to actually come by." How could I resist? A professional tarot reader literally crosses my path just as I'm deep into my research on historical divination practices. She moved closer, examining the antique tarot deck displayed in a glass case. "This is an old Rider-Waite deck, isn't it?" Her knowledge surprised me. "First edition, actually. It belonged to my grandmother. Remarkable condition, she murmured, her eyes lighting up with genuine interest. Would you mind doing a reading for me? For research purposes, of course. I led her to my reading table, a beautiful circular piece crafted from dark oak. As I began shuffling my working deck, I noticed her watching my hands with intense focus. What aspect of your life would you like to explore? I asked, maintaining the professional demeanor I used with all clients. My current path, she replied after a moment's consideration. I'm at a crossroads of sorts. The cards fell into a classic Celtic cross spread. As I revealed each card, Taylor leaned forward, her academic curiosity evident in her rapid note-taking. But something shifted when I turned over the Two of Cups in the Hopes position. This card, I explained, my voice softening, represents a deep connection, a meeting of minds and spirits. Our eyes met across the table, and the professional atmosphere suddenly felt charged with something more intimate. And what does it mean in relation to my crossroads? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It suggests that your path forward involves a significant partnership. My fingers brushed against hers as I pointed out details in the card's artwork. The contact sent a subtle current through my hand, and I noticed Taylor's sharp intake of breath. We both pulled back slightly, aware of the tension that had suddenly filled the space between us. She cleared her throat and attempted to return to her academic persona, but her slightly flushed cheeks betrayed her. This is fascinating, she said, her voice not quite steady. Would you be willing to be interviewed for my research? Your practical experience would add valuable context to my historical findings. I'd like that, I replied, beginning to gather the cards. My hands trembled slightly as I shuffled them back into the deck. As she stood to leave, Taylor hesitated. You know, I usually approach things from a purely academic standpoint, but there's something about this. She gestured between us. That feels different. Before I could respond, she moved closer, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear that had fallen loose. The gentle touch lasted only a moment, but it left my skin tingling. Our faces were inches apart, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might kiss me. Instead, she stepped back, maintaining her professional composure. I'll email you about setting up a proper interview. She turned to leave but paused at the door. And Evelyn? I think that Two of Cups might have been right. After she left, I sat at my reading table for a long time, running my fingers over the cards we had discussed. In all my years of reading tarot, I had never felt such a strong personal connection to a spread. Something was beginning, something that both excited and terrified me. That evening, as I closed the shop, I found myself looking forward to our daily morning runs with a new anticipation. The cards had shown a path, but for the first time in my career as a reader, I was more interested in the journey than the destination. 1 week after Taylor's visit to my shop, I found myself climbing the worn stone steps of Chandler University's history department. The autumn air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched beneath my boots as I made my way to her office. We had maintained our morning running routine, but our conversations had remained light, professional. Still, there was an undeniable undercurrent of anticipation building between us. Her office door was slightly ajar, warm lamplight spilling into the dim hallway. I knocked gently, and her voice called out, "Come in, Evelyn." She remembered to expect me, I thought, my heart doing a small flip. Taylor's office was exactly what I'd imagined, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, old maps of European cities, and framed illustrations of historical tarot decks. She sat behind a massive oak desk, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. "I hope you don't mind working late," she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair beside her desk. "The library's archive room is only accessible after hours, and there's something there I really want to show you." Hours slipped by as we pored over ancient texts about divination practices. Taylor's enthusiasm was infectious as she showed me woodcuts of medieval fortune-tellers and manuscripts describing Renaissance-era card readings. Our heads bent close together over the texts, her perfume a subtle distraction. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to a particularly detailed illustration. Her hand brushed against mine, and neither of us pulled away. "This deck dates back to 1475 Milan. The symbolism is remarkably similar to what you use today." We moved to the archive room as the campus grew quiet. The space was intimate, lit only by brass reading lamps that cast warm pools of light over the wooden tables. Taylor pulled out a collection of original tarot artwork, handling each piece with reverent care. These are incredible, I breathed, leaning closer to examine the intricate details. Our shoulders touched, and I felt her tense slightly before relaxing into the contact. "The way you read cards," she said softly, turning to face me. "It's not just about interpretation, is it? There's something more intuitive about it." "It's like having a conversation," I explained, aware of how close we were standing. "The cards speak and I listen. It's about connection." "Connection," she repeated, her blue eyes intense behind her glasses. "Like what you saw in my reading? The Two of Cups?" The air between us grew thick with tension. My hand found hers on the table, our fingers intertwining almost of their own accord. She reached up with her free hand and removed her glasses, setting them carefully aside. "Evelyn," she whispered, and then she was kissing me. It was soft at first, tentative, but deepened as I responded. Her lips were warm and tasted faintly of coffee. My hands found their way into her hair, loosening the bun until it fell around her shoulders. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, she rested her forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since that day in the rain," she admitted. "The cards knew," I said with a small laugh. "They always know." She kissed me again, briefly this time, before stepping back. "We should probably get these archives back in order," she said, but her voice was unsteady. As we carefully returned the documents to their proper places, our hands kept finding excuses to touch, small casual contacts that felt anything but casual. The professional pretense we'd been maintaining had crumbled, replaced by something far more exciting and uncertain. Later, as we walked to our cars in the empty parking lot, Taylor stopped me under a streetlight. "This changes things," she said, her expression serious. "The research, our professional relationship." "Are you worried?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. She smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "No," she said firmly. "I'm just thinking we might need to revise our methodology, maybe fewer formal interviews, more informal discussions." I laughed, relief flooding through me. "I think I can work with that approach." As I drove home that night, I could still feel the ghost of her kiss on my lips. The cards had indeed shown us a path, but reality was proving far more interesting than any reading could have predicted. Tomorrow's morning run, I thought with a smile, would definitely be different. The week following our kiss in the archives had been a whirlwind of shared meals and long conversations. Tonight, Taylor suggested cooking dinner at her place, claiming she made an exceptional risotto. I arrived at her modernist apartment complex just as the sun was setting over Chandler. Her home reflected her personality perfectly, clean lines softened by comfortable furnishings, walls lined with bookshelves, and carefully curated artwork featuring historical tarot imagery. The scent of saffron and white wine filled the air as I walked in. "You actually cook," I said, genuinely impressed, as I watched her move confidently around her kitchen. "I half expected you to be all takeout and microwave meals, given your academic schedule." She laughed, stirring the risotto with one hand while reaching for a wineglass with the other. "There's something meditative about cooking. It's like your card readings, part science, part intuition." She handed me a glass of white wine, her fingers lingering against mine. We talked about everything and nothing as she cooked. I learned about her childhood in Boston, her passion for history that began with finding an old deck of cards in her grandmother's attic. She listened intently as I shared stories about learning tarot from my grandmother, about the moments that convinced me this was more than just a parlor trick. "The cards are just tools," I explained, watching her plate the risotto. "They help people access what they already know deep down." "And what do you know deep down about this?" she asked softly, setting our plates aside and moving closer. "About us?" The wine had left me feeling warm and bold. "I know that I haven't felt this way in a long time," I admitted. "Maybe ever." She took my wineglass, setting it carefully on the counter before pulling me close. Her kiss was different from our first, more certain, more intense. My hands found their way under her cashmere sweater, tracing the warm skin beneath. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of sensation and emotion. Dinner was forgotten as we discovered each other, learning the language of sighs and touches. Taylor's bedroom was bathed in moonlight when we finally made our way there, silver streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Later, wrapped in her soft sheets, we talked more, about our fears, our hopes, the strange coincidence that brought us together. "Do you think it was really coincidence?" Taylor asked, tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. The cards would say there's no such thing, I replied, kissing her collarbone. Everything happens for a reason. The academic in me wants to argue that point, she murmured, but I'm finding it harder to maintain my skepticism lately. Morning found us tangled together, the early light painting everything in soft gold. I watched Taylor sleep, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her blonde hair spilled across the pillow. When she opened her eyes, the smile she gave me made my heart stutter. "Coffee?" she asked, stretching languidly. "We could go for our run after." I pulled her close instead. "The run can wait." We did eventually make it to the park, hours later than usual. The regular morning runners were long gone, replaced by mothers with strollers and elderly couples on walks. As we jogged our familiar route, everything felt different yet exactly right. "Move in with me," Taylor said suddenly, as we cooled down near the gazebo, where we'd first really spoken. "I know it's fast, but I have all this space, and you're there most nights anyway." I stopped, turning to face her. "Are you sure? What about your research, the professional boundaries?" She caught my hand, pulling me closer. "Damn the boundaries. Some things are more important than academic objectivity." I kissed her there, in the same spot where rain had first brought us together. "Yes," I whispered against her lips. "Yes to all of it." Walking home, hand in hand, I thought about how quickly life can change. One moment you're just going through the motions, the next you're completely transformed. The cards had hinted at this possibility, but experiencing it was something else entirely. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 month after I moved in with Taylor. It was a plain white envelope with no return address, but the contents turned my world upside down. "Payment of is required within days," it read. "This debt has been outstanding for too long." I stood in our kitchen, hands shaking as I reread the letter multiple times. There had to be some mistake. I had no debts, had always been careful with money. The shop was doing well, and I'd never taken out any loans. "Morning, love," Taylor said, walking in from her morning shower. She stopped when she saw my face. "What's wrong?" I wordlessly handed her the letter. She read it quickly, her academic mind already analyzing. "This has to be a mistake," she said, echoing my thoughts. "Or a scam." "There's more." I pulled out the second page, covered in details about supposed missed payments dating back 5 years. They have my social security number, my old addresses, even my grandmother's name. Taylor set down her coffee mug and pulled me close. "We'll figure this out. First thing, we're calling a lawyer." The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and endless phone calls. No one could trace the origin of the debt. Credit checks showed nothing unusual, and banks had no record of any such loan. Yet every morning, a new letter arrived, each more threatening than the last. "They're watching the shop," I told Taylor one evening, a week after the first letter. "I saw the same car parked outside 3 days in a row." She immediately went to the window, scanning the street below our apartment. "Did you get a plate number?" "No, but it's a black sedan, tinted windows." Very cliché if it wasn't so terrifying. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cards had been giving me strange readings lately, full of shadow imagery and warnings. Taylor found me at 3 a.m., sitting cross-legged on our living room floor with cards spread around me. "Talk to me," she said, settling beside me. "What are they telling you?" "Something's coming," I whispered. "Something connected to my past, but I can't see what." I picked up the tower card that kept appearing in every spread. Change, upheaval, destruction of false structures. Taylor wrapped her arms around me from behind. "Whatever's coming, we'll face it together." She kissed my shoulder softly. "I've been doing some research at the university archives. There might be a connection to your grandmother's time in Chandler." The next day brought another letter, this one containing old photographs. My grandmother in front of her original shop, dated 1985. The same shop that now housed my business. "The debt must be paid," the note read. She knew the price. "Taylor?" I called out, my voice breaking. She was at my side instantly, still in her teaching clothes. "Look at this." What was my grandmother involved in? She studied the photos carefully. "These were taken with a professional camera," she noted. "See the quality? Someone was documenting her deliberately." That evening, we sat surrounded by old papers and documents I'd kept after my grandmother's death. Taylor's academic training proved invaluable as we sorted through decades of history. "Wait," she said suddenly, holding up a yellowed envelope. This receipt. It's for exactly $250,000, dated 1985. But it's not a receipt for money paid, it's for money borrowed. From whom? I asked, dreading the answer. That's just it, she frowned. The lender's information is completely blacked out, like someone deliberately removed all identifying details. A knock at the door made us both jump. When we opened it, there was no one there, just another envelope on the welcome mat. Inside was a single playing card, the Queen of Spades. Scrawled across it in red ink were the words, "Time's running out." Taylor held me that night as I finally broke down, the stress of the past week catching up with me. "I can help with the money," she offered quietly. "No," I said firmly. "I won't drag you into this. Besides, we don't even know if this debt is legitimate." "I'm already involved," she replied, kissing my forehead, "and I'm not going anywhere." As we lay there in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. My grandmother had always told me that some debts can never be paid with money alone. I was starting to understand what she meant. The last thing I remembered before falling asleep was Taylor whispering, "Whatever secrets your grandmother had, we'll uncover them together, I promise." Little did we know how dangerous that promise would prove to be. Sleep became a luxury as Taylor and I delved deeper into my grandmother's past. The university's archive room had become our second home, with Taylor's academic credentials giving us access to historical records that might help unravel this mystery. "Look at this," Taylor said one evening, her voice excited. She pushed her glasses up her nose, a habit I'd grown to love. "Your grandmother's shop wasn't just any tarot reading business. According to these old business records, it was one of the most exclusive fortune-telling establishments in Arizona during the 1980s. I leaned over her shoulder, breathing in her familiar scent as I studied the documents. "These client lists, there are some prominent names here." "Exactly," Taylor replied, turning to face me. Our faces were inches apart. "Your grandmother wasn't just reading cards for housewives and curious teenagers. She was consulting for business tycoons, politicians, even some Hollywood names." The revelation sent a chill down my spine. But why would she never mention this? And what does it have to do with this mysterious debt? Taylor's response was interrupted by a knock at the archive room door. We both jumped, but it was just the night janitor. When we looked back at the documents, something caught my eye. "Wait," I said, pointing to a recurring notation in the margins of the client lists. "This symbol, I've seen it before." I pulled out my phone, showing Taylor the Queen of Spades card we'd received. The same small mark was visible in the corner. Taylor's academic enthusiasm kicked into high gear. "This changes everything. Your grandmother wasn't just reading cards, she was part of some kind of organized network." We spent the next few hours photographing everything we could find. Back at home, we spread the evidence across our dining table. Taylor had switched to her comfortable reading glasses, her blonde hair tied back as she concentrated. "The pattern suggests regular meetings," she mused, arranging documents chronologically. "Always on the third Thursday of each month, always with this same symbol present." I was about to respond when my phone buzzed. Another email from our mysterious debt collector. "Ask about the circle." She knew the rules. "The circle," Taylor repeated thoughtfully. "That's not the first time this term has appeared in these records." She pulled out several documents, pointing to subtle references scattered throughout. As we pieced together the fragments, a picture began to emerge. My grandmother had been part of an exclusive divination group called the Circle, providing services to some of the most powerful people in the country. "But something went wrong in 1985, Taylor said, highlighting the date on multiple documents. "The same year as that receipt for $250,000. I was about to respond when Taylor suddenly kissed me, soft and sweet. "What was that for?" I asked, surprised but pleased. "Because you looked like you needed it," she said simply. "And because I love watching you piece this together. You have the same intuitive spark your grandmother must have had." The moment of tenderness gave me strength. "The cards," I said suddenly. "We need to do a reading specifically about the circle." I cleared the table and laid out my grandmother's old deck, the one I never used for clients. As I began to shuffle, the energy felt different, heavier somehow. Taylor watched intently as I laid out a Celtic cross spread. The cards told a story of power, betrayal, and hidden knowledge, but it was the final card that made my blood run cold, the Tower, just as in my previous readings. Someone's trying to protect a secret, I whispered, staring at the ominous card. Something big enough to be worth $250,000. Taylor squeezed my hand. Whatever it is, we're closer to the truth. Your grandmother left breadcrumbs for you to follow. That night, as we lay in bed, Taylor held me close. We'll figure this out, she promised, her lips brushing my temple. But, Evelyn, promise me something. If things get too dangerous, we'll walk away. I didn't respond immediately, thinking of the growing stack of threatening letters, the mysterious car still watching the shop, and the secrets still buried in my grandmother's past. I promise, I said finally. But we both knew it might already be too late for that. The pressure was mounting. 3 weeks had passed since the first letter, and the demands were becoming more aggressive. I stood in my shop, staring at the latest threat. You have 1 week left. The circle doesn't forget. The bell above the door chimed, and I quickly tucked the letter away. It was Taylor, looking concerned. 2 more members of the circle have been identified, she said without preamble. One died in 1986 and the other. Well, that's why I'm here. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase. Margaret Wells, former member of the circle, lives in a nursing home just outside Chandler. She's 92, and according to my research, was your grandmother's closest friend in the group. My heart raced. We need to talk to her. The drive to the nursing home was tense. Taylor's hand found mine across the center console, offering silent support. The facility was modern and well-maintained, with gardens visible through large windows. Margaret Wells sat in a sunny corner room, alert despite her age. Her eyes fixed on me immediately. Eleanor's granddaughter, she said, not a question. I knew you'd come eventually. Mrs. Wells, I started, but she waved her hand dismissively. Margaret, please. And you must be the professor who's been digging through old records. She smiled at Taylor. Sit, both of you. We don't have much time. Over the next hour, Margaret revealed a story that seemed impossible. The circle wasn't just a fortune-telling group. It was a network of genuine psychics and mediums who worked with government agencies, corporations, and powerful individuals. Your grandmother was the strongest among us, Margaret said, her voice dropping. Until the incident in '85. That's what they're after, isn't it? The old debt? I nodded, and Margaret's face darkened. The money was never the real issue. It was what Eleanor saw that night, the reading that changed everything. Before she could continue, a nurse appeared. Mrs. Wells needs her medication and rest, she said firmly. As we stood to leave, Margaret grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Check behind the shop's east wall, she whispered. Eleanor left something there. But be careful, they're watching. Back at the shop, Taylor and I waited until after dark. The east wall was solid brick, but careful inspection revealed a loose panel near the floor. Behind it was a small cavity containing a sealed envelope and an old tape recorder. We hurried home, hearts pounding. The envelope contained a letter in my grandmother's handwriting. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, they've finally come collecting. The tape will explain everything, but playing it puts you at risk. Some truths are dangerous. Taylor set up the old recorder while I paced nervously. The tape crackled to life, my grandmother's voice filling our living room. She described a reading she'd done for a prominent senator, a reading that revealed a decades-old conspiracy. The senator had paid for her silence, but the truth had eaten at her. The money was blood money, my grandmother's voice explained. I took it to protect you, to ensure they'd leave us alone. But I knew someday they'd come for it, not for the money, but for what I knew. The tape cut off abruptly. Taylor and I sat in stunned silence until my phone buzzed, another anonymous message. You found the tape. Now you understand what's at stake. That night, we held each other close, the weight of my grandmother's secrets heavy between us. We should go to the police, Taylor suggested, trailing kisses along my shoulder. With what evidence? I asked. A mysterious tape and a story about psychic conspiracies? They'd think we're crazy. Taylor rolled over to face me, her expression serious in the darkness. Then we find proof. Your grandmother left us breadcrumbs for a reason. Later, as Taylor slept, I slipped out of bed and did another reading. The cards were clear, a storm was coming, and we were at its center. I crawled back into bed, and Taylor instinctively pulled me close. Whatever happens, she mumbled sleepily, we face it together. I kissed her softly, drawing strength from her presence. Tomorrow, we would begin searching for proof. Tonight, I just wanted to hold on to this moment of peace before the storm broke. The deadline loomed just 3 days away, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. I stood in my shop, staring at the empty reading chairs. No clients today. I'd canceled all appointments after finding a dead crow on the doorstep, another warning from our mysterious tormentors. Taylor was at the university, desperately searching for any official records that might corroborate my grandmother's recorded confession. We'd spent sleepless nights transcribing the tape, analyzing every word for clues. The senator she'd mentioned was still alive, now a powerful figure in Washington. My phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. "Found something, coming now. Don't leave the shop." 20 minutes later, she burst through the door, clutching her laptop. "Look at this," she said, pulling up a news archive. 3 days after your grandmother's reading for the senator, his biggest political rival mysteriously disappeared. The case was never solved. And you think they're connected? The timing's too perfect to be coincidence. Your grandmother's reading must have revealed something about this disappearance. She ran her fingers through her blonde hair, a gesture I'd learned meant she was putting pieces together. The senator paid for silence, but the truth was too dangerous to keep. I sank into my reading chair, overwhelmed. "I can't do this anymore, Taylor. The threats, the surveillance, the constant fear." I gestured to the shop around us. "Maybe I should just close down, disappear for a while." Taylor knelt before me, taking my hands in hers. "Is that really what you want, to run?" Before I could answer, my phone rang, an unknown number. With shaking hands, I put it on speaker. "Miss Carter," a distorted voice said, "we're growing impatient. The debt must be settled, or certain unfortunate truths about your grandmother might find their way to the press." "What truths?" I demanded. "Ask yourself why she really left Boston, why she changed her name, why she—" The call cut off abruptly. Taylor was already typing on her laptop. "They just made a mistake," she said, her academic intensity in full force. "They gave us new leads to follow." But I barely heard her. My grandmother's past in Boston? A name change? Everything I thought I knew about my family history was unraveling. "I need some air," I muttered, heading for the door. Taylor called after me, but I was already outside, walking blindly through the afternoon heat. I found myself at Pioneer Park, at the gazebo where Taylor and I first really talked. How simple everything had seemed then. Now, my life was dissolving around me, and I was dragging the woman I loved into danger with me. Taylor found me there an hour later. She sat beside me without speaking, her presence alone a comfort. "I'm scared," I finally admitted. "Not just of them, but of what we might find. What if my whole life has been built on lies?" She took my hand, intertwining our fingers. "Your gift is real. Your love for your grandmother is real. What we have is real. The rest, we'll face it together." "I could lose everything," I whispered. "Or we could uncover the truth and stop running from shadows." She turned to face me. "But whatever you decide, I'm with you." Back at the shop, I made my decision. I began packing up client files and personal items. Taylor watched silently as I worked. "They win," I said quietly. "I'll close the shop, pay whatever they want." The sound of breaking glass cut me off. A brick had smashed through the front window, wrapped in a note, "Too late for payment. The truth comes out tomorrow." Taylor's arms were around me instantly as I stared at the shattered glass. This was it, the breaking point. But instead of fear, I felt something else stirring, anger. "No," I said firmly, straightening up. "They don't get to win. My grandmother protected this secret for a reason, and now it's my turn to figure out why." Taylor smiled, a fierce pride in her eyes. "There's my girl. What's the plan?" I moved to my reading table, pulling out my grandmother's old deck. "First we do a reading. Then we use your research skills and my intuition to piece this together before tomorrow." As I shuffled the cards, I felt a familiar energy surge through me. The time for running was over. Tomorrow would bring either answers or destruction, but at least we'd face it on our terms. Taylor squeezed my shoulder as I laid out the first card. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "at least we're in it together." Detective Sarah Martin sat across from us in her office, reviewing the evidence we'd gathered. The early morning sun cast long shadows across her desk as she studied my grandmother's tape and Taylor's research files. "Let me get this straight," she said, looking up. "You're suggesting a sitting U.S. senator was involved in a disappearance 35 years ago, and your grandmother's tarot reading somehow exposed this?" "The timeline matches perfectly," Taylor explained. her academic precision lending credibility to our wild story. And the threats we've received are very real. She pushed forward the photographs of the surveillance car and the brick through my shop window. Sarah leaned back, running a hand through her short dark hair. Under normal circumstances, I'd dismiss this as conspiracy theory nonsense. But, she pulled out a file. The senator in question has been under internal investigation for months. This might be the connection we've been looking for. My phone buzzed, another anonymous message. You've chosen poorly. Watch the morning news. As if on cue, Sarah's office television flickered to life. A breaking news banner scrolled across the screen. Historic Chandler fortune-telling shop linked to political scandal. The reporter stood outside my shop, now cordoned off with police tape. Sources claim the owner's grandmother was involved in a decades-old conspiracy involving prominent political figures. They're trying to discredit us, Taylor said, squeezing my hand. Make it look like a publicity stunt. Sarah was already on her phone, barking orders. I want officers at that shop now, full protection detail. She turned to us. You two stay here, I'm calling in some favors. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Federal agents arrived, drawn by the senator's involvement. Taylor's academic credentials and meticulous research provided the framework they needed to take our claims seriously. The senator's been careful, one agent explained, but this could be our breakthrough. We just need proof of the original reading. I remembered something Margaret had said about my grandmother's records. The east wall, I said suddenly. We only found the tape and letter, but what if there's more? Sarah drove us to the shop herself. Crime scene technicians had already started examining the wall cavity we'd discovered earlier. As they worked, I felt a familiar tingling in my fingers, the same sensation I got during important readings. There, I pointed to a spot slightly higher than the first cavity. Check there. The technicians found another hidden compartment containing a small notebook. My grandmother's handwriting filled the pages with detailed accounts of her readings, including the fateful session with the senator. This is it, Sarah breathed, reading through the entries. Names, dates, specific details about the disappearance. Your grandmother recorded everything. Within hours, the story exploded. The senator's office issued a hasty denial, but the evidence was mounting. Federal agents arrested 2 men found in the surveillance car outside my shop, former private investigators with links to the senator's security team. That evening, Taylor and I stood in our apartment, watching the news coverage. The senator had announced his immediate resignation, citing health concerns. The truth about the 35-year-old disappearance was finally emerging. Your grandmother was incredibly brave, Taylor said, pulling me close. She knew this day would come eventually. That's why she left you the breadcrumbs to follow. I turned in her arms, overcome with emotion. Thank you for believing in me, for standing by me through all this. She kissed me softly, then rested her forehead against mine. I told you we'd face it together. Sarah called later to tell us the immediate threat was over. The federal investigation would take months, but we were no longer in danger. The shop could reopen whenever I was ready. That night, I did one final reading about the situation. The cards showed clarity, justice, and new beginnings. As I shuffled the deck back together, I felt my grandmother's presence, her approval. I think she'd be proud of us, Taylor said, watching me from the doorway. Of all of us, I agreed, thinking of Sarah, Margaret, and everyone else who'd helped uncover the truth. The cards had led us here, just as they'd led my grandmother years ago, but it was love, for justice, for truth, and for each other, that had given us the strength to see it through. Spring arrived in Chandler with a burst of desert wildflowers and new beginnings. 3 months had passed since the senator's resignation, and life was settling into a different rhythm. My shop had reopened with a fresh coat of paint and a new energy that seemed to draw clients from across the state. The morning sun streamed through the restored windows as I prepared for my first reading of the day. The media frenzy had finally died down, though occasionally a reporter still stopped by hoping for more details about my grandmother's role in exposing the decades-old political scandal. Taylor had incorporated the whole experience into her research, turning it into a groundbreaking paper about the historical influence of fortune-tellers on American politics. Her department head had been so impressed that he'd fast-tracked her for tenure. Your grandmother would love this, Taylor said, walking into the shop with 2 coffee cups. She'd made a habit of bringing me morning coffee before heading to her lectures, the academic world actually taking divination seriously. I accepted the coffee with a kiss. Speaking of serious, how's the book coming along? She'd been approached by several publishers interested in a book about the circle and its connection to American political history. Almost finished with the first draft, though I'm still struggling with the chapter about your grandmother's prediction methods. Maybe we could work on that together tonight, I suggested, arranging my cards for the day ahead. After dinner with Sarah? Detective Sarah Martin had become a close friend after helping uncover the truth. She was meeting us at our favorite restaurant to celebrate closing the last loose ends of the case. The day passed quickly, filled with readings that felt more powerful than ever. My grandmother's old deck seemed to have taken on new life since the truth had come out, as if unburdened by its long-held secrets. That evening over dinner, Sarah shared the final details of the investigation. The senator's facing multiple charges, she reported, and his confession included details about other cases. Your grandmother's records helped crack 3 cold cases. I still can't believe she kept such detailed notes, Taylor mused, her researcher's mind clearly at work. She must have known they'd be needed someday. Back home, Taylor spread her manuscript pages across our dining room table while I prepared tea. The chapter about my grandmother's methods needed work, but something else caught my eye, a section about modern tarot practices. You've written about my business model, I noted, reading over her shoulder, about combining traditional readings with modern psychological counseling. Because you're revolutionizing the field, she said, pulling me onto her lap. You're building on your grandmother's legacy while creating something entirely new. She was right. In the months since reopening, I developed a unique approach that blended traditional tarot reading with contemporary therapeutic techniques. The academic validation from Taylor's research had helped establish it as a legitimate practice. I'm thinking of expanding, I admitted. Opening a second location, maybe training other readers in this method. Taylor's eyes lit up. That's perfect. We could develop a proper training program, combine practical experience with historical context. I laughed, cutting her off with a kiss. Always the professor. Always your professor, she corrected, holding me close. Who else would help you bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern practice? Later that night, as Taylor slept beside me, I did a reading about our future. The cards showed growth, partnership, and positive change, but more than that, they showed balance between past and present, between academic rigor and intuitive wisdom, between her world and mine. My grandmother had preserved the truth through her cards, protecting it until the right time. Now, with Taylor's help, I was building something new on that foundation. The shop was no longer just a place for readings. It was becoming a center for studying and understanding the real power of intuitive practices. As I slipped back into bed, Taylor stirred. "Everything okay?" she murmured. "Perfect," I whispered, curling into her warmth. "Just perfect." The cards had led me to this moment, just as they'd guided my grandmother years ago, but it was love, for my work, for the truth, and for the brilliant woman beside me that would lead us forward. 1 year had passed since the senator's scandal broke. Pioneer Park bloomed with spring flowers as Taylor and I maintained our morning running routine, though now we jogged side by side rather than passing each other. "Remember when we used to pretend we weren't watching each other?" I asked, slowing to a walk near our familiar gazebo. "You mean when you thought I was just researching and I thought you were just another jogger?" Taylor laughed, wiping sweat from her brow. We were both terrible at hiding it. The park had become busier since my shop story made national news. Tourists often stopped by, hoping to get readings from the fortune teller who helped expose political corruption. But this morning was quiet, just regular joggers and early dog walkers. "I have a reading scheduled at 10, I said, checking my watch. "Want to grab coffee first?" Taylor's smile held a hint of nervousness. "Actually, I thought we could do a reading now. Just us." Something in her tone made my heart skip. She pulled my grandmother's deck from her running jacket. She must have grabbed it before we left home. "Here?" I asked, surprised. We'd never done a reading in the park before. "Right here," she said, leading me to the gazebo, where it all began. I shuffled the cards, feeling their familiar energy. The morning sun cast long shadows through the gazebo's lattice work as I laid out a simple 3-card spread. The first card showed new beginnings, the second, partnership. But before I could turn the third card, Taylor covered my hand with hers. "Wait," she said softly. Before you reveal that last card, I need to ask you something. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught as she dropped to one knee. Evelyn Carter, she said, her voice trembling slightly. This past year has been extraordinary. You've shown me that there's magic in the world, not just in your cards, but in the way you see life, in the way you love. Will you marry me? Tears blurred my vision as she opened the box, revealing a vintage ring with a design that matched the back of my grandmother's tarot cards. Where did you find this? I whispered. Margaret helped me track it down. It was your grandmother's engagement ring. She left it with instructions to give it to you when the time was right. I pulled her to her feet, kissing her deeply. Yes, I breathed against her lips. 1,000 times yes. She slipped the ring onto my finger, and I finally turned over the last card, the 10 of Cups, lasting happiness, fulfilled wishes. Later that evening, we celebrated with Sarah and our closest friends at the shop. Taylor had arranged everything, including a surprise video call with Margaret, who beamed at us from her nursing home. Your grandmother would be so proud, Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. She always said the cards would lead you to love. As our friends raised their glasses in celebration, I looked around my shop, this space that held so much history, so many secrets, and now so much promise for the future. Taylor wrapped her arms around me from behind. Ready to start our next chapter? She whispered. I turned in her embrace, studying her face. The face I'd first glimpsed on a morning jog. The face that had stayed beside me through danger and revelation. The face I would wake up to for the rest of my life. With you? I smiled, feeling the weight of my grandmother's ring on my finger. I'm ready for anything. The cards had brought us together, but it was love that would write our story. And as I kissed my fiancé in the shop where it all began, I knew this was just the beginning.